Hello, everyone. Welcome to the first episode of the Mythological Africans Deep Dive series. My name is Helen, and I am the one woman army behind the Mythological Africans creative space. I am very excited to be here with you today, and we are going to be talking about the otherworlds and underworlds of African peoples. We decided on this topic based on a poll that I ran on the Mythological Africans Twitter space. So I threw some ideas out there, and the community selected what they wanted to hear about first. So if you want to be able to participate in these selections in the future, please go ahead and follow Mythological Africans on Twitter, and you can also subscribe to this YouTube channel so you can see the videos when they are released. So today we are going to start with a general look at the worldviews and cosmological models of different groups of people around the continent. And I do this to provide some context. If you don't have a sense of a people's worldview, then the nuances and different characters of things in that worldview, people, places, it's hard to grasp. And what tends to happen is that you use whatever information you have access to fill in the gaps, which might result in a not particularly accurate view of what people believe. So we'll start with an overview of different cosmological models. Then we'll talk a little bit about how the spirit realm, which is what other worlds and underworlds are collectively referred to, how they are accessed, and then we will look at some specific examples of other worlds and underworlds from different groups of people across the continent. And hopefully, I have a representative enough sample here. And then we'll talk about future worlds, which are ideas that I believe in about how the spirit realm of indigenous African beliefs could coexist with the spirit realms of different spiritual beliefs that are prevalent on the African continent, mainly Islam and Christianity. As some of you may know, there's a tendency for the ideas, spiritual ideas coming out of indigenous beliefs to be characterized as bad or demonic even. And there is a lot of complementarity between these ideas, which I think could be focused on more and just result in a better way by which people can occupy space and not be at each other's necks. So we'll talk about that in the future worlds section. But first, like I said, let's take a look at the worldviews and cosmological models of different African people, starting with a definition of what people really do think about, and it's not different from what is believed across the world. The idea that there's the world of the living, the physical world where we are right now, there's plant and animal lives, other, other, mani- other manifestations of life, such as trees and rivers and seas and oceans and mountains and forests. And then you have the world of spirits, the spirit realm, where you find ancestors, the unborn, who are sometimes ancestors, nature spirits, deities, and the spirit realm is what, like I said, is the term that is usually used to talk about these underworlds and other worlds. Now, underworld, other worlds, what do these mean? An other world is just a world beyond the present reality that we experience on a daily. And this is the location of supernatural beings, as we talked about ancestors, nature spirits, deities, ancestors, etc. And an underworld tends to refer to the abode of the dead. Now, these spirits of the dead could be benevolent, such as the ancestors who we all make prayers to, or who some of us make prayers to and propitiate. They could be malevolent. We know that not all ancestors are bright and well. And they could be neutral. They could just, be people who have departed this realm. But then the thing is, the term underworld tends to carry a negative connotation, and there are various reasons for this. But what I hope to achieve with this video is to kind of soften that perspective, that negative perspective a little bit, because if you look at mythologies across the world, the underworld is not necessarily a bad place or a place of evil spirit. In many cases, it's just where the spirits of the dead are, and it can be a really regenerative space. It could be a really fertile space for rebirth, sort of like how a seed is planted in the ground. If that seed doesn't go into the ground, underworld, it cannot grow. So in many myths or mythological traditions around the world, the underworld is not a negative place. So just something to keep in mind as we continue with the discussion. Um, what we have here is a general representation of the cosmology of most African peoples. And I'm sorry, I got this diagram from this book, which I love very much. It is by Nwando Achebe and it's called Female Monarchs and Merchant Queens in Africa. It's a fascinating read. But this diagram here is not specific to any African people. It just gives an overall representation of what people think about the world. You have the spiritual world, as we talked about, where you have God or the supreme being, ancestral spirits, and things like that. And then you have the physical world, which is where you have human beings and plant and animal life, kings and queens, titled men and women, warriors, workers, and what she refers to as spiritual or human slaves or useless people, which I cringe a little bit at those terms, but this is her model, and I'm going to present it as is because it does give a fairly good representation of the overall cosmology of different African peoples. But different groups of people have, specific ideas of what their cosmologies are. So let's take a look at a couple. We have the Yoruba model of the cosmos. You have Orun, which is the world of spirits. It's where Olodumare, the supreme being, is located. It's where ancestral spirits, the Ogungun, Egbe, who are your spiritual family, and other such spirits are located. It's also the location of the Orisha, who we all, at least I think, know, Ogun, Shango, Yemoya, and Oshun. So they are located in Orun. And then you have Aje, which is the world of the living, the world where we are. This is where you have people who know the secrets, have access to the sacred knowledge in at least the Yoruba conception of the world. You have kings and queens, you have elders, priests, and the like. And then you have regular folks who may not necessarily have access to this knowledge, children, strangers, the uninitiated. And what I want you to notice is that there's always this line of division between the two, which is sort of this liminal space across which movement is made, either from the world of the living to the world of the spirits, or from the world of the spirits to the world of the living. And this is a theme that you will see repeat itself over and over. If you remember from the diagram which we just looked at, that space was occupied by spirit mediums and other individuals who have access, back and forth, and we'll take a look at that later in the discussion. In the Akan worldview, we see a similar trend. You have the person in the middle, which I think is kind of representative of the general worldview. Like in the Akan cosmology, Nyame, who is the supreme being, is located in the center, and everything else, occurs around Nyame. So you have the person, and then in the other world, you have spirits, you have their personal spirits, their destiny, their ancestors, and in the physical realm which they inhabit, you have their parents, the mother, the father, the siblings, the community. So this is a representation of the cosmos of Akan peoples. In Igbo cosmology, you have a similar trend. You have the human world, you have the spirit world. And what is interesting and something I want to draw your attention to is not to get too tied to what is up and what is down, because we just saw the case of the Akan where it was, Nyame in the middle and everything else around it. So what to pay attention to is the idea that there is a space occupied by the humans, there's a space occupied by the spirits, there's a line of liminality, which death is often, a means by which you go across from one realm to another. And there are spirits that go back and forth, as we see in the case of the Igbo. There are many spirits that are in the realm of the humans, and others, such as ancestral spirits, that are in the spirit world. And there is this movement back and forth between the two. So I am intentionally not going too deep into these cosmologies because, like I said, it's just to provide some context for the subsequent discussion about otherworlds and underworlds. What I do have are references which go with the slides and which I will put also in the comments. So if you want to dig some more into this, you have access to these resources. So moving on, you have the cosmology of the Buganda people from Uganda. And what you see here in this diagram is a representation of a ritual space, a shrine, which is organized to represent the cosmos. You have the world of the dead, which in this case is the forest. It was a common practice amongst many African peoples that the dead were buried in a specific place in the forest. And then you have the world of the living, separated into spaces for men and spaces for women. And this is something that you see in many communities across the continent, where there are spaces designated for men, spaces designated for women, and the like. And once again, this line of liminality separating one realm from the other, with the capacity for beings to move back and forth between these realms. And then what we have here is a diagrammatic representation of the Bakongo cosmos. And this is an interesting one. We'll talk a little bit more about the Bakongo ideas of otherworlds and underworlds later in the discussion. So we have Nseke, which is the world of the living, and you have Mpemba, which is the world of the dead. And we will talk, like I said, more about Bakongo cosmology, because there was an interesting evolution in Bakongo ideas about underworlds and otherworlds, especially after contact with European, specifically Portuguese traders and individuals, colonial administrators, and the like. So this diagram is called the Dikenga, and it has such rich meaning and symbolism. I encourage you to examine it some more. It's very enriching. So how is the spirit realm accessed? In the worldview of most African people, the spirit realm is it's a reality superimposed on the human world. The spirits who are in this realm have an impact on what happens in the human realm, and it is accessible through shifts in consciousness, such as dreams, visions, shamanic journeys. There are portals in nature through which you can access the spirit realm. In some cases, specific natural manifestations, geographic formations, and locations are other worlds in and of themselves, mountains, forests, and the like. Shrines are another example of a space which can represent an other world, or a portal through which you can access the other world, as we just saw with the case of the Buganda. And of course, death, which is the ultimate rite of passage from the world of the living to the other world, which could be an underworld, like we just saw. Now, there are specific individuals in different African cultures who have a high sensitivity to the other world. In many cases, twins are one of such individuals, and they would become spirit mediums or shamans. Queer people, we have the case of the Chibado, who are transgender people in the culture of the Ndongo, who are from Angola, and these were, important spirit mediums who were part of the queen or the ruler's retinue. Neurodivergent people, people who have a way of seeing the world that most people term neurotypical don't. These kinds of people tended to be spirit mediums who experience the spiritual realm as a more tangible space than others do. And such individuals could be really highly valued for their knowledge and abilities, or greatly feared depending on the context. Now, certain animals and plants were believed to have access to the spiritual realm. Chameleons, I believe in the tradition of the Yoruba, Agemo is a chameleon who is a messenger of Olodumare, the supreme being, and Agemo carries messages to other beings in the supreme being's realm in Orun, and to beings in Aje, the world of the living. Birds are a common creature that have access to the spirit world. Dogs, frogs, and later in the discussion we'll have an interesting story from the Ambondo people, the Ambondo are in Angola, about a frog that became a messenger between a man and the other world. Geographical formations are commonly viewed as portals through which the other world can be accessed, or are in and of themselves the other world. And what you see in this picture is Mount Fako in Buea, Cameroon, the town where I grew up. And this picture is taken from the front of the house where I grew up. And Mount Fako is the realm of Efatsamoto, who is the god of the Bakru people who are located in the southwest region of Cameroon. And this whole mountain was considered his home. Now, every year there's this race that is organized, the Mount Cameroon Race of Hope, and people run up and down this mountain, which this mountain is about 4,100 meters tall, and I think in feet it's about maybe 12,000 or 13,000 feet or something like that. So that's quite, an exercise. They do it in about 3-4 hours or so. But it is believed that because this realm, this mountain is the Fasamoto's realm, if you come to this race with charms or amulets or anything to make you perform better than the others, you're basically to cheat, then Efasamoto will take care of you. And this is also a place where when Baku people, elders and traditional leaders need to make sacrifices, need to, talk with their gods. This mountain and the forest around it is one of the places where they go for these activities. So an example of a natural formation, a geographical location, which is an other world in and of itself. And this happens to in many cases across the continent, examples which we will look at later. So let's look at some specific examples of other worlds and underworlds. Starting with a revisit of Orun, which is the other world of Yoruba people. It's the realm of the ancestors, the Orisha, and other spirits, um, which we talked about. Oro, which is this fierce, spirit which women cannot see, and is usually used to enact punishment on people who have transgressed. You have Iwin, who are nature spirits, for lack of a better way of putting it. They're like ghosts or fairies, or like you have Egbe, which is a spiritual family that everybody is supposed to have, at least in the minds of, in the worldview of Yoruba people. You have Ajogun, who are evil spirits, and these spirits all inhabit the realm of the spirit realm, Orun. It's also the location of Eldumare, the Yoruba supreme being. But they are close to the living, they're close to the physical earth, involved in the affairs of people. The Egungun, for example, are ancestral spirits for the Yoruba people. They have masquerades who honor the Egungun, and in the homes of people who follow the traditional Yoruba ways, there's usually a room where masks and other such manifestations of the Egungun are stored. It is a sacred space, a shrine, an other world, almost as a portal through which you can access, the spiritual realm. And the Yoruba have a saying: the world is a marketplace we visit, the other world is home. And what I thought was interesting about this saying is how it's complementary to other beliefs in spiritual traditions. You have for some Christians, this world is not really home, heaven is home. And I just thought this was an interesting example. Also, what you see in the picture is a calabash on which carvings are made to depict Orun and Ajay, which is the world of the living. Ajay is the world of the living, and Orun is the spiritual realm. And this is an example of how ideas of African people were preserved and transmitted. So they might not have been a written language, but in the art and other such cases, these ideas were preserved, and it's a beautiful carving, if I do say so myself. All right. Among the Sosa, I hope I'm saying that right, in South Africa, Omanga, I also hope I'm saying that right, is the underworld, which is an interesting case because Umhanga is where human and all creation is supposed to have come from. Um, in some translations, Umhanga is a cave, which again is an example of a physical geographical formation, which is a portal to another world. In some translations, Omanga is a place of reeds, which is a river, and this is a pretty common idea because the Xhosa people have these beings called Abandbomlambo, and these are the river people. These beings are believed to be the holders, the keepers of Xhosa culture, the creative ideas which Xhosa culture is built on, and sometimes they will take certain individuals to their underwater realm to teach them secrets of herbalism, mediumship, divining, and how to take care of the community. So I think this is an interesting example of an underworld, underground location, which is not a bad place. It's actually a realm of, beauty and creativity, the place where all that is known in the Xhosa universe comes from. It's also the location of the ancestors, as we see. We have Kumpemba returning the discussion to the Bakongo. Now, Kumpemba is where the dead are buried. And amongst the Congo, as the case is in other places across the continent, the dead were taken to this specific location in the forest, and that's where they were laid to rest. There were grave mounds which were decorated, and urns, beautiful pots, little containers of food and other things, charms and things like that were left in these locations, and this landscape became the realm of the dead. A similar case is seen in amongst the Akan people, and we'll talk about that example later. But what I find interesting is that I saw this research paper which drew many parallels between the burial practices of Black people in the southern United States and the burial practices of the Congo, which, just warmed my heart because it shows how culture, remained despite the horrific things that people experienced when they were brought to the United States. So you have Kupemba, which is the land of the dead, where the dead are taken. But we also have Mputu. And I highlight the concept of Mputu because it's an example of a case where ideas about the world evolved as new information came in. So as we well know, the Congo area was an area of high European activity back in the 15th, 16th century when contact was being made between Europeans and people along the West African coast and Central African region. So Putu was the word Putu, as we'll see later, is derived from the word Portuguese, and it was kind of a play on words and how the Congo people came to refer to these, strangers who had come to their land, and it was an evolution of an idea of where these people came from. Keeping in mind that in the Congolese worldview, Kalunga, which is the ocean, is the liminal space that you go across to go from the world of the living to the world of the dead. You had these ships that came out of Kalunga, and these beings who looked so very different from the Congo people showed up. So the idea was that these beings came from another world, and myths, of course, came up about how these beings came into being. One of the myths is discussed here, where it's said that everybody once lived together, but then the blacks separated from the whites by crossing the river Congo before settling in the present territory. So just an interesting example of how stories evolve to incorporate new ideas. So like I said, Mputu is a short way of referring to Mputu Lukizo, which is a play on the word Portuguese, and nowadays it's used to refer to Europe. If you're familiar with the dynamics of life on the African continent, you know that travel to Europe or to the US is something that a lot of people do, and it is deemed as sort of this other world, especially. Um, and an interesting thing to note is that this idea really evolved out of the contact between European ideas of the world and African ideas of the world. So nowadays, Mputu refers to Europe. Putu refers to these other worlds from which white people came, coming across Kalunga, the ocean. To some people, the other world is where people go to suffer. It's an underworld of sorts. And so I highlight this to emphasize the fact that ideas, myths, traditions are not static entities. They adapt to new information. I believe in the creation myth of the Bali people from Cameroon. When Zingraf, who was a German explorer, showed up, the Bali people's cosmology adjusted to accommodate the idea that this was this new being, and that's an interesting story in its right. I'll talk about it sometime in mythological African space. But yeah, the idea of Hutu and Kupemba from the Congo people. Amongst the Akan people, Samanadze and Asamando or Samankir is the world of the dead. It is created by Nyame, the Akan supreme being, and Abosom, who are the gods of the Akan people. And Samanadze is designed to receive the spirits of the dead who are found worthy and resurrected by Nyame. The interesting thing about Samanadze is that the Abosom, who are the gods, cannot enter Samanadze because they are not dead. Samanadze is strictly the realm for the dead. And I talked about this story maybe a week or so ago on the Mythological African Space, the story of Kwasi Benefo, who was a man who encountered a lot of misfortune. His wives kept dying. He was a good guy, tried to take care of people, but his wives kept dying. And at one point, he gave up hope and said he was going to go to Samanadze to join his wives. So he went into the forest to the place where people are buried, and then eventually came to a river, which again is a common thing that shows up bodies of water, the ocean, rivers, lakes, as we'll see later, where he met Akomye, who is the woman who guides the spirits of dead women into the world of into Samanadze, the world of the dead. And she told him, "You're a living being. You cannot enter Serenity." And he was just like, "Okay, I'm going to sit here and wait until I die because I see no reason to remain in the world of the living if everyone I love keeps dying." So Akonya took pity on him and let him enter into Serenity. But she told him, "You will see, you will hear activity, you will hear people, but you will not be able to see anything." So an example from a story which incorporates ideas that people actually believe. As we will see later, there are some ideas which are stories that are told. Just as today we have stories which incorporate hell as believed by Christian philosophy, and in some stories where hell is a almost fictional account. So similar thing happens in the mythologies and folklore of African people. So moving on from the Akan, we go to the Ihanzu from Tanzania, and Ulungu is the underworld of the Ihanzu people, and this is, as you see, the world where the ancestral spirits go. Some of these ancestral spirits could be benevolent, they could be malevolent, but they retained their gender identities. They could be male or female. So another example of an underworld being just the space that spirits of the dead go to. And there are many, many more examples of underworlds and otherworlds, which we're not going to go into too much detail. There is Dapar and Dazugevu of the Dagara people, the Dagara found in Burkina Faso. And Dapar, I believe, is where the people who lived well and were helpful, good people in their communities go to. Dazugevu is where people who did not live well, who were not helpful, were harmful to their communities go to. Parallel the ideas of heaven and hell. And if I remember correctly, the ideas of Dapar and Dazugevu were influenced by the Dagara encounter with Christian philosophy. There is Blolo, which is the village of truth of the Baole. I hope I'm saying that right, in Ivory Coast. And Blolo is the spirit realm where amongst the Baole people, each human being who is here on earth has their spirit husband or their spirit wife in Blolo. And that's what you see in these diagrams here. They're called the Blolo Ba and the Blolo Bian. And what tends to happen is that some people would have these statuettes as a physical representation of their spirit husbands or wives, and they will build shrines to these statuettes and propitiate and interact with them. And it was believed that by doing this, you maintained good interactions with the spirits of the underworld. And these spirits were there to provide counsel, spiritual advice. So it was a good thing, this coexistence of the world of the living and the other world. Amongst the Kikuyu in Kenya, Kirinyaga, which is Mount Kenya, is the realm of Ngai, the supreme being, and there are many stories similar to Efasamoto of the Bakure about encounters with Ngai and things that Ngai did from Mount Kenya. The forest realm of Kumba, who is the forest spirit of the Baka in Cameroon. The Baka are the so-called pygmies, and I believe that term is, no longer encouraged because it's considered derogatory. You have people, the Baka, the Bad Jelly, I believe, and other such people who are fondly known as pygmies. But to them, the forest is this other world inhabited not just by Kumba, as is the case of the Baka, but ancestral spirits. And the Baka are hunter gatherers, so they might have small communities, but they mainly spend their lives in the forest. And before they venture out of their settlement into the forest to hunt or to forage, there's specific rituals that they carry out to ensure that these are successful trips, that they are in harmony with the spirits of the forest, especially with Kumba. So an example of the forest as an otherworldly realm. Among the Oku people in Cameroon, Lake Mars is a lake that's found, it's a crater lake, so it's on a formerly volcanically active mountain. And there is a whole myth around the figure of Mars. He's believed to be the founding ancestor of the Oku people, and it's said that he came to the original people who were on the land and asked for help. and most people drove him away because he was unkempt and unshaven. But a particular group of people, welcomed him and helped him, gave him food, helped him shave. And it is to these people who he said, he gave advice. He said, it's going to rain, there's going to be a flood. You should move to higher ground. So these people listened to him, moved to higher ground. The people who didn't listen to him stayed, and then it rained and rained and rained, and there was a flood, and this lake formed, and this is where Maois is now. Among the Oku people, when the elders and the Fon, who is the traditional leader, they make annual, I believe, sacrifices and propitiations to Maois. They go to this lake, which is a physical manifestation of the other world in which their ancestor lives, their supreme being, like a way of putting it. Because that's a common theme that you'll find amongst different African peoples. There's a supreme being, but sometimes the supreme being is a founding ancestor. This is the case amongst the Baka, where Kumba is the forest spirit, but in some accounts, Kumba is the founding ancestor of the Baka. Moving on to other examples, you have the underworld realm of Yeban. I'm sorry, excuse me. The underworld realm of Yeban and Ndumbulu from the Dogon in Mali. And this is an example of a place where it's not, a bad place. It's just a realm of regenerativity and rebirth. You have the realm of Lord Sun and Lady Moon in the Ambundu story of Kimanaze, and this is what I mentioned earlier, where a frog was a messenger between the world of the living and the people in the kingdom of the sun and the moon. And the story goes that a young man decided that he wanted to marry the daughter of Lord Sun and Lady Moon, but he was in the realm of humans. He had no way to send her a message. So as he thought about it, this frog came up to him and said, "Hey, I know how to get your message." And he said, "Hey, how will you know this?" And it turns out that the frog knew of a stream or a spring where people from Lord Sun and Lady Moon's realm would come to carry water. So what the frog did was that he went and hid in the water. And when the Lord Sun and Lady Moon's servants came to carry water, he got into one of their containers and so was taken up into the realm of the sun and the moon, and he left a message in this girl's room. And it caused quite a stir in the realm because it was it was a wonder, how did this person get access to us? So this guy must be some powerful spirit on in the world of the living, and they continued this courtship with the frog acting as intermediary. And eventually, with the frog's help, this man was able to convince Lord Sun and Lady Moon to bring their daughter to Earth so he could marry her. So an interesting case with an example of an animal, a frog, acting as the one with the ability to move back and forth between the realms. In amongst the Buganda, Gulu is their supreme being, and he lives in the sky. And there's a story, the creation myth of the Gulu of the Buganda involves Kinta, who is the first man, and he also married the daughter of Gulu. And it's the story of how death came to exist because Kinta went up into the realm, into Gulu's realm, courted his daughter, and brought her back to Earth. But Death, who was, I think, the girl's brother or her uncle, was not happy with this arrangement. So he followed the couple down to Earth and started causing havoc, going underground, to a realm of his own, and wanting to take the Kinta's children, and the whole story evolved. I think I've talked about this before on the mythological African space. So an example of an otherworldly realm is the sky, which is a realm of Gulu of the Buganda people. And then you have the Mwindo epic from the Nyanga people in the DRC. There are many, many different other worlds in the Mwindo epic. There is the Kuba's realm, which is the sky realm. Kuba is the lord of lightning. And this happens later in the story where Mwindo kills his friend, Kirinu the dragon. So Kuba, who at first was Mwindo's ally, Mwindo is the hero of the story. And just a little background about Mwindo. We've talked about him quite a little bit on the mythological African space. So he's the son of a chief called Shemwindo. And Shemwindo is one of those chiefs who wanted to hold on to power. So he told his wives, don't give birth to any sons. if you do, you and your son are going to die. I only want daughters so I can maintain my control of the land. And then, of course, one of Shem Windo's wives gives birth to a son, Window. And Window, is not just an ordinary child. He's a hero type figure. And so the whole story is how Windows' father, Shem Window, tried to kill him. And then when he realized he couldn't kill Window, he runs away from Window, and Window, chases him across different realms, eventually catches him. And Window is helped by different beings, Kuba being one of them. So back to the story. Kuba, the Lord of Lightning, helps Window, defeat his father, and other supernatural beings that Window encounters during his journey. But then Window kills Kuba's friend. So Kuba takes Window up to the sky realm to teach him a lesson. Window is reprimanded by the sun, by the moon, by the stars. So that's one otherworldly realm from the Window epic. There is the realm of Mokiti, the lord of the watery depths. Mokiti married Window's aunt, Iangura, and is one of the places to which Window ran when he was running away from his father, who was still trying to kill him. So this was an underwater realm. There is the realm of Muisa, an underground realm, also from the story. And the interesting thing about Misa's realm is that it's accessible through the roots of a plant called the Kitoka plant. And I have searched and searched, and I don't know what this plant is, its common name is. So if you do know, please let us know in the comments, because this is one thing that I've been trying to figure out for a long time. But an example of a plant being a means by which an other world is accessed. There is the underworld visited by Unkama. Unkama is a hero in a Zulu story, and this is an interesting story because Unkama, there was this porcupine who, was causing havoc in Unkama's farms. So he decided one day to follow this porcupine to where the porcupine came from. So he followed the porcupine. The porcupine went through a hole in the ground, and Unkama followed the porcupine underground. Went under the ground and arrived in this place, which was a whole village of people, men, women, children. And Unkama was just like, okay, I am going to get out of here because I don't know what this is. I don't want to get into trouble. So he just backtracked, got out from this underground realm, and went back to his village. And to Unkama, this was just, one day's trip. But when he got back to his village, everyone was surprised to see him because they thought he had been dead for months and months. So an example of an underground realm. And then there are many underground villages in the bush, from Amos Tutola's Palm Wine Drinker. That's a story that I love to death. It's just such a fun story. As well as Dio Fagumwa's Forest of a Thousand Demons. And these stories are largely based on Yoruba folklore. And what you see is that the forest is the realm of, different spirits, benevolent or malevolent, and just in keeping with this theme of, the forest and other such geographical formations being an otherworldly realm which certain people can access. In the case of the palm wine drinker, the main character in the story, loses his palm wine tapper, and is just so distraught by this man's death, decides to follow him to the world of the dead, and other world, to convince him to come back, and then goes on this adventure where he goes to all kinds of places and meets all kinds of creatures in the forest. And then there is the Forest of a Thousand Demons, where a hunter called Akara Ogun travels into the forest and encounters different creatures and different realms, and is able to prevail because he also was a spiritually powerful being. So fascinating stories, examples again of how people's actual beliefs got transformed into stories, which in our days now we would call fiction, but is grounded on the actual beliefs of different people. So examples of otherworlds and underworlds from African peoples. And some of these stories I've talked about on the Mythological Africans page. Some of them I will talk about. So like I said, follow us on Twitter for these and more. So future worlds. All right. So before I say anything about this, it's important that I emphasize that my intention here is not to validate African worldviews by comparing them to, other spiritual worldviews. There is this tendency where people think that if you present these ideas side by side, you are trying to use one to validate the other, and that's just not my intention here. The African worldview exists. It has has always existed, and it doesn't need to be similar to any other worldview to have validation. There is a tendency, however, for the indigenous African worldview to be underlooked or characterized as bad or as demonic when it's set alongside worldviews of Christianity and Islam. And so my intention with the next slide is just to draw parallels between the two to show that they are complementary. They, in some cases, fill in each other's gaps. In some cases, they have the exact same ideas. For example, you have the idea of a supreme being. Across different African peoples, there are supreme beings who created the world, following different, creative patterns. Same as you have God in Christianity and Allah in Islam. You have ancestral spirits in indigenous African beliefs who are intermediaries between the living and the supreme being. You have saints and walis in Christianity and Islam. You have helpful and harmful spirits in African indigenous beliefs, the same as you have angels and demons in Christianity, malaika and jinns in Islam. So my intention here is just to say there is these are complementary ideas. They don't need to stand in opposition to each other. They can exist with each other without one necessarily being considered bad, because what happens is that when some people take the perspective that the supreme being in indigenous African beings, in indigenous African beliefs, the ancestral spirits, the helpful spirits, are all bad. And I think this robs us of a more fulfilling experience of identity now. I'm not saying that you need to believe in indigenous African beliefs to have a full sense of yourself. If you have other beliefs and they work for you, that is great. But what I want to push back against as gently but firmly as I can is the idea that indigenous beliefs are bad, because if you take a close look at them, they are simply expressing much of the same ideas that you see in major world spiritualities. So that's my little, spiel about this, and I'll get off my soapbox now. All right, and that's it. Thank you guys so much for staying with me through these videos. Thank you for watching. Thank you for supporting. If you want to know more and join the discussion, subscribe to this channel. Follow Afromyth Hub on Twitter. That's where the bulk of the discussion happens. And you can also sign up for my newsletter on Substack. Every month I will send an overview of what the Mythological African space will be focused on, the different activities, and it's just a really good way to keep in touch. And I have a list of references here that were used to inform this discussion. Like I said, I will drop them as well in the comment section so you can have access to them. But otherwise, thank you so much for staying with me through this discussion. I hope you learned something. If you have any questions or comments, drop them below. Ask me on Twitter, and hopefully we can continue to have productive discussions about the worldviews and beliefs of African people. So thank you so much again, and I hope you have a great day wherever you are.